Hi, my name is Jen Yacapucci, and I'm part of the circuit breaker team. I'm going to walk you through what is an eligible circuit breaker transportation expenses, how to handle the different scenarios that you could have related to transportation expenses, and what that means for claiming. In a separate demo, I'll walk you through how to claim these transportation expenses in the new circuit breaker claim system. So today, as I mentioned, we'll look at what is an eligible transportation expense related to circuit breaker claiming. How do you claim transportation expenses when you're paying a third party for these expenses? How do you claim transportation expenses if you're providing your own district bus or district resources for claiming these transportation expenses? And how do you claim transportation expenses provided through another district agreement, which we usually see as a parent reimbursement? So first, what is an eligible transportation expense? So transportation expenses can be claimed for students attending out-of-district programs. What is an out-of-district program? It's a private approved program. It's a student that's placed at an individual student program, or what we call an ISP, which requires OSD authorization to claim the tuition. We used to call this the unapproved programs. It's now called the individual student program. Or a student that's placed at a public or collaborative program that is not housed in your district's schoolhouse. Transportation expenses that cannot be claimed are for students that are attending an in-district program. And in-district programs include transportation of students to in-district programs or a school, including a collaborative program that is housed in your district's building. If you have questions on this, please reach out to your liaison. So what transportation expenses can be claimed? So services need to be included in the student's IEP. We realize that transportation expenses can include two things. One is the cost of the vehicle to transport the student, and the second is the cost of any additional transportation services that are supported in the IEP that are happening while the student is on the vehicle. This usually we see as a monitor or a nurse, but could also be an aide or an ABA aide. Expenses must be allocated to an individual student for claiming. So if you're claiming based on a per student expense. So you'll have to break down cost to an individual student, and I'll walk you through how to do that in the next coming slides. So if you have a third party that you're contracting with, such as Vanpool, and I'm going to use Vanpool as my example just to keep it consistent, you're claiming based on invoices and you're claiming based on how each student was invoiced. If you're providing transportation with your district resources, you're claiming based on your prior year end of year report. And I'll show you a couple slides that break down that down for you. If you're unfamiliar with your end of year report, I suggest that you reach out to your business office. They're the ones that are completing it and submitting it to DESE every year. If you're providing services based on an agreement with a parent, you'd be reimbursed based on what that agreement is or what you have reimbursed the parent. And if we came to audit, we'd look up any backup that you have related to what you're paying the parent for that transportation. So the first scenario, you're claiming based on a third-party vehicle. In this case, I'm going to use Vanpool. Vehicle expenses must be allocated to an individual student for claiming. So if there's multiple riders on a route, you need to break down that cost proportionally shared among all the riders on that route. And in the next slide, I'll walk you through a scenario where you can see that change riders on the same route. Additional service expenses must be supported in a student's IEP and again are claimed based on the individual student. So if you have a bus monitor that you're paying Vanpool for, those expenses should be itemized on invoices and the cost should be allocated across all the students that are receiving that monitor service. If you have a student that's receiving an aide, an AB aide, or a nurse on the bus, you're claiming those services based on the number of hours that that service is being provided on the bus and the group type at which that service is being provided, whether it's individual, small group, or group. And again, you're breaking that down by at the student level too. On each invoice that Vanpool provides or whatever third-party vehicle you're using, you must have some sort of student identifier for each invoice and each route. Whether that be the SACID or the student's initials, we need a way to tie back the cost to the individual student. So now how do you determine if you have multiple riders on a route that you're paying a third-party vendor for? So we see from this example, we have Route 123. And in September, the cost, and we have 3 students, Amy, Bob, and Charlie. And in September, the cost for the route was $2,000 for 20 days, which comes to $100 a day. We only had one rider on this bus the month of September, and that was Amy. So Amy's cost for just September is $2,000, $100 a day at 20 days. The month of October was the same. It was $2,000 for 20 days. And now we see Bob is now on the bus. So Bob and Amy are both on Route 123 the month of October. So now Amy's cost has changed from $100 to $50 because now she's sharing this route with Bob, and Bob's cost is now also $50. Now the month of November, it's $2,000 for the route 123, but it's 15 days only. So now we see the cost getting broken down between Amy, Bob, and now Charlie is on Route 123 the month of November. So that cost of the $2,000 is split between the 3 riders, Amy, Bob, and Charlie for the 15 days. So now Amy's cost for the month of November has changed to $44.44. Bob's cost changed from $50 for the month of October to November, $44.44, and Charlie's only cost is $44.44 because we're splitting the cost across those 3 riders the month of November. And this is important because when you go to enter on the claim, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, you want to get the average daily rate and the total number of days. So in order to do that, you're going to take the total days that I'm using Amy as the big example here. We're going to use Amy, and we see she rode for a total of 55 days. And we need to figure out the average daily rate. So we know the first month was $100 a day. We know the second month was $50 a day. And we know the third month was $44 a day. So we take all of that and we divide that by the total number of days, 55, and we get the average daily rate of $66.67. And the total for Amy for the 55 days from September through November would then calculate to $3,666.67. And you can see we did the same thing with Bob, and we're only getting his total and dividing it by 35 days because that's all he traveled. His cost would be $1,666.67. And then we did the same thing with Charlie, and he only was on the bus the month of November. So his cost is only divided by 15 days to get his average daily rate, which is $44.44, and it's $666.67. So as I mentioned, you need to be able to determine the daily rate, which will not match any of your invoices' daily rates because you have riders that are changing month to month. You don't know what could happen. So you need to figure out the average daily rate by student based on the number of days you're being billed, the total daily rate that you're being billed, and then the number of riders that are on the route month to month. And that's what makes that daily rate change. And you come up with an average daily rate, which in this case for Amy is $66.67. Now, cost of district resources, this is, I'm shifting gears, that's third party. And going back to a second, just with this, if you were sharing a monitor, you'd be figuring out the same thing with the monitor. You'd be taking the monitor cost, dividing it by the daily rate and the number of riders that are sharing that monitor. Just wanted to make sure I got that in there before I move to the next slide. So now shifting gears to you're providing your district bus and your district resources. So now you're providing your own bus or other district resources to transport the student. How do you determine the cost of that on a per student basis? So you would use your prior fiscal year end of year report, as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, to calculate the daily transportation. So for example, for this claiming cycle of FY25, you'd have to use the end of year report from FY24. And as I mentioned, if you're unfamiliar with the end of year report, please reach out to your business office as they have copies of that. Ancillary transportation services not reported in Schedule 7, for example, an aide, an ABA aide, or a nurse, should be claimed based on the number of hours per day and the group type that the service is being provided, whether it's individual, small group, or group. And you should check with the business office to see if these services were reported in the Schedule 7 as part of the reporting period. This is an example of what the Schedule 7 looks like. And what we're looking at specifically are the rows here that have information in them. But we're looking at the special education transportation. And you'll see they're circled here, and the rows that we're looking at are highlighted. So you'll see we're looking at the expenditures for special education pupils that are transported outside of the district. And we're looking at the number of riders that were transported in these three areas. And I'm going to go over these three areas next. So the three areas we're looking at are row 4080, which is if you're paying another LEA tuition and you're providing your district bus to transport that student. We're looking at row 4110, which are students that are being transported to a collaborative that you're using your bus for. And we're looking at row 4120, which is where private school day placements students are reported if you're providing your bus. These are the three areas that we most likely see. If you have students that are being transported in other locations that don't fit any of these three categories, please reach out to your circuit breaker liaison and we'll be able to figure that out for you based on your end of year report that we have on file. So looking at these three rows, I'm going to start with 4080. You'll see 4080 has a cost that was reported of $35,000 on the end of year report from FY24. And we see there's only 2 riders that are being transported in this area. So each of those riders' cost would be $17,500. But how do I figure out the daily rate? In these situations from the end of the year report, we're suggesting that you figure out the annual cost for each rider. So in this case, $17,500, and you divide that by 180 days. Always divide it by 180 days. No matter how many days you know the student was transported, you're dividing it by 180 days to get the daily cost, the average daily cost, if you will. And if the student was transported less number of days or the student was transported more number of days, you're still claiming the average daily cost that you get when you divide the annual cost by 180 days. So in this case, we have 2 students that were transported to another LEA by your bus, and we see the 35,000 that's divided by the 2 equals 17,500. When we divide that by 180, we get $97.22 per day. When you're claiming, you need to figure out your average daily rate. So you would take that 97.22 and you'd claim that, and then you would claim the number of days that the student was transported. In row 410, we're doing the same thing, but we have more students that are being transported by my district bus to a collaborative. That cost is 150,000 and we have 6 riders. So we take that 150,000, we divide it by the 6 and we get 25,000 per student. When we divide that by 180, we get an average daily cost of $138.89. In row 4120, we see the cost is bigger and there's more riders. So we see 1.2 million with 40 riders. And we get an average daily annual rate of $30,000. When we divide that by the number of by 180 days, we get the average daily rate of $166.67. That's what you're going to claim in the claim system. And one other thing I want to mention besides two important things is you're dividing the annual rate by 180 days. And you're also dividing it by the number of students that were reported in the prior year Schedule 7. If you have less students or you have more students, it doesn't matter. We're getting the annual rate and the average daily rate based on what has been reported on the end of year report for FY24. So that's how we're kind of getting the daily rate that'll be reported no matter how many students you have you're transporting now, and no matter how many number of days these students are being transported. If you have a parent reimbursement, parents providing transportation for their children who have special transportation listed in their IEPs, and we'll reimburse based on what any agreement you have on file with this parent to transport. We will have to look at backup if we come out for an audit. But just one thing to note is the typical reimbursement we see is 2 round trips per day that's getting to school and returning home, and a direct route between the student's home and school in terms of reimbursement. But again, whatever agreement you have with your parents, we will reimburse. So please go to the next module and I will walk you through how to actually claim based on these scenarios that we just went over. Thanks and see you soon.